At 1 a.m. on August 8, 1975, the Banqiao Dam ceases to exist. Not weakens, not cracks, ceases to exist. A 6-kilometer section of earthen wall, 24 meters high, holding back 600 million cubic meters of water, is gone in minutes. The wave that follows is not a wave. It is a moving wall of water and debris 10 kilometers wide and 3 to 7 meters tall, traveling at 50 kilometers per hour across the Huai River Basin in Henan Province, China. The towns of Suiping, Shiping, Runan, populations in the tens of thousands, have no warning systems, no evacuation orders. The phone lines are already down. The roads are already flooded. Many residents are asleep. Some will later describe hearing a sound like continuous thunder, a roar that doesn't stop. By the time they understand what it is, there is nowhere left to run. In the hours that follow, 62 dams across Henan Province fail in cascade. The water has nowhere to go. It spreads across 12,000 square kilometers of farmland, cities, and villages, an inland sea still and dark, where entire communities once stood. An estimated 170,000 people are dead or will be from drowning, disease, and starvation in the weeks that follow. 11 million are displaced. It is one of the deadliest infrastructure failures in recorded human history. The Chinese government will not acknowledge the scale of this disaster for nearly 2 decades. And the dam? The dam was supposed to be indestructible. The engineers who built it called it the Iron Dam. But one engineer had a different name for it. Years before it collapsed, he called it a bomb. The Banqiao Dam sits on the Ru River, a tributary of the Huai in Henan Province. Construction began in 1951, just 2 years after the founding of the People's Republic of China. The dam was part of an enormous Soviet-assisted infrastructure program, 1,387 dams built across Henan Province in under a decade, most of them earthen fill construction. Speed was doctrine, ambition was mandatory. Doubt was, in certain political climates, dangerous. The dam was completed in 1952. Its design specification allowed it to withstand a maximum inflow of 500 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours. That figure was not an engineering consensus. It was a political target, set to match what Chinese meteorologists called a 1,000-year flood event. But one engineer, a hydraulics specialist named Chen Xing, reviewed the design and reached a different conclusion. He calculated that the dam's spillway capacity was dangerously insufficient. He identified 12 specific structural flaws in the Banqiao and surrounding dams. He submitted a formal report recommending major redesigns. The report landed in 1954. Chen Xing was labeled a right-wing conservative for questioning the project. He was removed from the engineering team. His report was filed, then buried. What exactly that report contained, the precise calculations, the predicted failure conditions, would not become public for decades, and the reason why will define everything that follows. Before we follow the water, we need to understand the silence that came after it. In the weeks following August 8, 1975, the Chinese government did not announce a disaster. There were no international aid requests, no press conferences. The foreign press had almost no access to Henan Province. The official death toll, when it was eventually acknowledged at all, was listed as 26,000. That figure appeared in internal documents. It did not appear in any public broadcast. The real number, pieced together over subsequent decades by journalists, academics, and survivors, converges around 85,000 to 240,000 dead, with 170,000 as the most widely cited estimate. The range itself tells you something. The record-keeping either failed completely or was deliberately incomplete. It would be 1995, 20 years after the disaster, before a Chinese government publication acknowledged the event in any meaningful public detail. A full accounting has never been issued. The gap between 26,000 and 170,000 represents at minimum 144,000 human lives that the official record chose not to count. That gap did not happen by accident. To understand August 8, 1975, you need to go back to August 6th. Typhoon Nina makes landfall on China's southeastern coast on July 31, 1975. It is an unusual storm. Rather than dissipating as most typhoons do when they hit land, Nina stalls over Henan Province. It interacts with a cold front moving in from the north. The result is meteorologically catastrophic. Between August 5th and August 8th, parts of Henan province receive over 1,000 millimeters of rain. Jumadian Prefecture, where the Banqiao Dam sits, receives 830 millimeters in 24 hours. Some weather stations record over 1,000 millimeters in a single day, nearly matching Henan's average annual rainfall. For context, London receives approximately 600 millimeters of rain in an entire year. The Banqiao Dam was designed for 500 millimeters in 24 hours. It now faces 830. The reservoir begins filling at a rate the spillways cannot handle. The dam operators understand this. On the evening of August 7th, they send telegrams, multiple telegrams, to the Henan Provincial Hydrological Bureau and to the Regional Telecommunications Office, begging for authorization to open the floodgates and release water in a controlled manner. Those telegrams sit unanswered. The reason for that silence will not emerge for years. The residents living downstream from Banqiao had little understanding of the danger above them. Many had never been told a dam existed. There was no public emergency plan, no sirens, no designated evacuation routes. In the village of Shahedian, a few kilometers below the dam, residents remember the rain as extraordinary but not yet terrifying. Farmers worried about their crops. Parents kept children inside. Some families had moved their belongings to upper floors as a precaution against flooding, the modest, practiced flooding they had experienced before. They had no frame of reference for what was coming, because what was coming had no precedent. In the town of Huaibin, 150 kilometers downstream, local officials had received fragmentary reports of rising water levels. Some ordered partial evacuations of low-lying neighborhoods. But communications across the province were already degraded by the storm. Messages arrived incomplete or not at all. A People's Liberation Army unit stationed in the region received orders to prepare for flood response. They were not told the scale of what the engineers on the dam already knew was coming, because the engineers on the dam had already done the math. The water in the reservoir was rising at a rate of approximately 40 centimeters per hour. The spillways were at capacity. The dam's freeboard, the margin between water surface and dam crest, was almost gone. At 11 p.m. on August 7th, the Banqiao Reservoir reaches its maximum design capacity. The water keeps rising. By midnight on August 7th, the dam operators at Banqiao have stopped sending telegrams. There is no longer anything to ask for. The decision window has closed. The water is now overtopping sections of the dam crest. This is called overtopping failure, the most basic, most preventable form of earthen dam collapse. Water flowing over the top of an earthen embankment begins to erode the downstream face. Once that erosion begins, it accelerates. The dam does not hold and then break. It dissolves. The operators do what they can. They are not negligent individuals. They are people trapped inside a system that removed every tool they needed before the crisis arrived. Insufficient spillway capacity, no authorization to release water unilaterally, degraded communications, no downstream warning infrastructure. Some accounts suggest workers attempted to manually operate floodgates in the final hours. The gates, under the pressure of a full reservoir, could not be fully opened. At approximately 1 a.m. on August 8th, a 6-kilometer breach opens in the Banqiao Dam. The physics from this point forward are not complicated. 600 million cubic meters of water, equivalent to 240,000 Olympic swimming pools, find a 6-kilometer gap in a wall that was holding them back. They do not wait. They do not hesitate. The collapse of Banqiao is not an isolated event. It is the first domino. At 1 a.m., Banqiao fails. The discharge rate at the breach point reaches approximately 78,000 cubic meters per second, equivalent to the average flow rate of the Amazon River, concentrated into a single rupture point. At 1:30 a.m., the flood wave reaches the Shimantan Dam, 8 kilometers downstream. Shimantan was also at capacity. It collapses within minutes of the wave's arrival. By dawn on August 8th, 62 dams have failed across Henan province in a cascade triggered by Banqiao's collapse. Hundreds of kilometers of dike systems are breached or overwhelmed. The floodplain below is not steep terrain. It is flat agricultural land, the breadbasket of central China. The water does not drain. It spreads and spreads and spreads. The flood zone eventually covers approximately 12,000 square kilometers. In that zone, an estimated 10 million people. The physical wave kills tens of thousands in the first hours, but the aftermath, the weeks of inundation, the destruction of food supplies, the disease that follows stagnant water, kills tens of thousands more. Estimates of deaths from starvation and epidemic in the following months range as high as 145,000. The Chinese military responds. Millions are rescued. The scale of the mobilization is extraordinary, but it is mobilization after a catastrophe that did not have to happen, and that in the weeks following, the government works quickly to ensure the outside world does not learn about. In Shahadian village, the wave arrives without warning at approximately 1:15 a.m. Survivors describe it differently depending on where they stood. Those close to the dam describe a wall of black water and debris. Those farther out describe the water rising, slowly at first, then faster than they could move. Furniture floating, rooftops becoming islands, people climbing trees and holding on through the darkness and the rain. One survivor, a woman named Zhang Guanglan, was 22 years old in August 1975. She later described clinging to a tree for 3 days before rescue, watching bodies float past, watching neighbors lose their grip and disappear into the current. She described calling out to someone she recognized in the water and receiving no answer. For those who survived the initial wave, the following days were a different kind of survival. The water didn't recede. It sat. Contaminated with human waste, animal carcasses, and agricultural chemicals, the floodwater became a disease vector. Typhoid, dysentery, leptospirosis. The government deployed 2.1 million soldiers and civilians in the relief effort. This is documented. But documented alongside it, in internal reports that would surface decades later, is the acknowledgement that the relief effort could not reach many areas for days because the floodwater made access impossible. For the people in those areas, rescue came too late, or it never came at all. Here is what Chen Xing's report actually said. Chen Xing, the hydraulics engineer dismissed from the Banqiao project in 1954, had identified a fundamental error in the dam's original design. Its spillway system was designed to handle a flood flow of 1,720 cubic meters per second. Chen Xing's own calculations, based on historical flood data for the Ru River Basin, showed that a major storm event could generate inflows of over 13,000 cubic meters per second. The spillway was designed for roughly 1/7 of the actual danger. This was not a rounding error. This was not a minor miscalculation. This was a catastrophic underestimation of the river's potential, built into the dam's foundational design, recognized and documented by a qualified engineer, and then suppressed for political reasons. After his dismissal, Chen Xing continued to raise concerns through official channels. He wrote letters, he requested meetings. In one documented account, he told colleagues, 9 out of 10 dams will collapse. He was not referring to a distant theoretical future. He was describing the infrastructure being built around him. In 1961, partial reinforcements were made to Banqiao following earlier, smaller flood events. The spillway capacity was modestly increased. It was not increased to the level Chen Xing had recommended. The political and financial cost of doing so was judged too high. That judgment, made in an office in 1961 by officials whose names have never been publicly attached to the decision, condemned 170,000 people to a flood that had already been predicted. The unanswered telegrams from the night of August 7th have a documented explanation, and it is worse than silence. The Henan Provincial Hydrological Bureau received the distress telegrams from Banqiao Dam operators. Internal records indicate that officials were uncertain whether authorizing a controlled release of water would cause downstream flooding, and that they could not reach higher authorities for authorization during the storm. The bureaucratic structure required approval from multiple levels before a dam operator could release water unilaterally, even in an emergency. That structure existed because in earlier years, unauthorized releases had caused localized flooding and political embarrassment. So the system designed to prevent small problems guaranteed a catastrophic one. An operator who opened the gates without authorization risked punishment. An operator who waited for authorization that never came watched the dam fail. There is a term in system safety engineering for this, a negative outcome trap, a system in which every available action leads to punishment, so actors freeze. The operators at Banqiao were not negligent. They were trapped in an approval chain that had no emergency bypass. In 1963, 12 years before Banqiao, a different dam in China, the Lujia Dam in Hebei province, failed under similar conditions. An internal engineering review recommended systemic changes to spillway standards across the national dam network. The review was classified. The recommendations were implemented partially, in some regions, over several years. In Henan province's Ru River basin, they were not implemented at all. The death toll the Chinese government acknowledged, 26,000, was not an estimate, it was a choice. Internal government documents from the disaster response, some of which surfaced in the 1990s through the work of journalist Yi Si and academic researchers, indicate that officials were tracking